Hello, welcome to another edition of Road Noise with Hutch. Today we're going to talk about retirement plans, mainly 401ks, IRAs, SEPs, simple defined benefit plans, anything that is pre-tax, because there's a lot of confusion around there. On one hand, you have, it seems what's like the whole financial media saying you have to max your 401k, you have to max your 401k. Your CPAs often saying you have to max your 401k. And then you have these crazy insurance planners that for decades have been saying, actually, no, it's a trap. Like think of that meme with from Star Wars with the orange-headed guy. It's a trap. We'll talk a little bit about that trap in just a little bit, but nowadays I'm actually seeing CPAs walk that back and say, no, we really do need to prioritize Roth and figure out when to do Roth conversions. We're going to talk about that. It's a pretty common question. And a lot of financial planners on what I call FinTwit, it's starting to become more mainstream to prioritize Roth over the 401k. So let's first talk why it was conventional wisdom before and why it no longer applies. So why it was conventional wisdom before was because the tax system was all about deferral. Defer, 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 defer. If you think about how your CPA gets graded, don't you always ask them, hey, how can I save more on taxes? I need to save money on taxes. So it's like a quick fix. Like, can I get a little more tax savings? There's that Dave Chappelle meme. Can I get a little more tax savings? Sure, max your 401k. That's how they get graded. That's how you grade them. So of course they're going to do that, but they didn't think about the exit strategy. And we find people, especially doctors, because they're able to do something called the defined benefit plan, which is like a maxi 401k plan instead of deferring, 23,000 in a 401k, which is what it is for 2024. Defined benefit plans, you can do something like 150,000. It's age based, but I'm just saying like maybe 200,000. So these guys defer a lot of money because they usually just have a couple office employees where they have to do small matches, contributions, and then they can just massively stack the benefits in their favor. But going back to the 401k, why this is a problem is because we have 35 trillion debt and growing. Like apparently it's growing by like $1 billion a day of interest we have to pay. By we, I mean our federal government has to pay on the national debt, and at some point they're going to have to knock that down. So it's interesting. They're printing all this money and financing it with debt, and they are creating a lot of inflation. And who knows, maybe their plan is to inflate away the purchasing power of your money and then use that to pay down the debt. I don't know. I don't know, but I do know they're going to have to come inside, and they have billions of dollars sitting in 401ks that hasn't been taxed yet. And they, with the stroke of a pen, can change how much of that is their share and how much of it is your share. Like when you look at your 401k balance, you think like, ooh, baby, I deferred all this taxes. I'm investing all this money. Look at my statement. It's so big. Yeah, but that's not all yours, right? When you deferred it, maybe you'd have a third less if you paid your taxes, but now you owe that third not only on what you put in, but everything it grew to. And who knows, a third might go to 40% or 50%. Like maybe even if they change nothing, if you just become more successful, like this is a big problem. So we recommend that unless you're in the highest tax bracket and you're in a very penal state, like I am, there's really no reason to be maxing because you're going to have problems getting that out. Like we know we have clients who are retirees that now they're forced to take RMDs, required minimum distributions, and they don't want it. It turns out our most successful clients, they were so successful building wealth elsewhere, they don't want to. They just want to leave the money in there, let it grow, and give it to their kids. 401ks, IRAs used to be a great legacy tool. There was something called Stretch IRA. And so if you were in really, really successful, you could then leave your IRA as an inherited IRA to your kids. Or if you have multiple kids and maybe, one of them becomes a doctor or is super successful, maybe you don't leave him the IRA. Maybe you leave him the high basis, the stepped up in basis stock or stepped up in basis real estate or cash. And then you leave the IRA to your kid who is just making ends meet, or maybe a missionary or whatever that looks like, because essentially because they'll be able to take it out at a lower bracket. Um, it's more effective. But with the Secure Act and the different versions of the Secure Act, it's you no longer can stretch an IRA. And a lot of people don't realize this. The max stretch period is 10 years after you and your spouse die. And so that creates a problem for this money. It's a temporary way station. And meanwhile, the market's growing and you're compounding your gains inside the 401k for you and your family, your Uncle Sam. Um, and you're compounding the problems of being able to get it out. And so we recommend that if somebody's going to give you a match, like an employer, sure, go ahead and max the 401k. But if not, it probably doesn't make sense to do anything, certainly anything over the match, or maybe anything at all. Again, if you're just bumping into the highest tax brackets. But you should be able to kind of look towards the end of the year and see if you are. And if you are, then by all means, go ahead and do a little. But you don't want to concentrate too much of your wealth to that bucket that's never been taxed, unless you have a lot of money in Roth and or a lot of money in life insurance. And even if you have a lot of money in Roth, when the market's down, you don't want to cash out money from your Roth because you're going to have to cash out more shares just to create tax exempt income or to create the same amount of income that you need, because you don't want to pull from your 401k because that's going to cause you to bump into a higher bracket in retirement. Having some life insurance that is immune to market losses and immune to taxes is definitely going to make sense. Again, we're talking about 40 banking, so you should have all of these pieces. But let's go back to 401ks and maybe a different way to think about them. So when you're investing, usually I ask how many in bonds, how much they have in bonds, and it's usually not much. A lot of times they're invested 100% equities, and it's riding that compound curve. But again, they're compounding that problem, and they'll have a cash emergency fund on the outside. I brought this up in the precious metals edition. Maybe you rethink that and you invest your cash in some precious metals, or invest it in maybe in actual stocks that you can borrow against, or you set up that life insurance program that's going to have a comparable long-term growth rate as high yield savings, probably more over time if you include the tax forgiveness that is available there on the growth. And depending on what type of policy, whether it's whole life or IUL, you may be able to get kind of watered down market returns in there. Maybe you invest your cash that way, knowing you can kind of deallocate some of the equities in your 401k and put those in like a high yield savings or short-term bonds, which are paying, 4 and 5% right now. And then that will compound, versus when you're compounding 5% in a high yield savings account, you're not compounding 5%, you're earning 5 and you're paying back 1.5 to Uncle Sam, or paying back 2% of that 5 to Uncle Sam. And so it's not compounding as a greater rate. And the one good thing about retirement plans is as long as you leave it in there, it does actually compound. And the interesting thing is when people are in long-term equities, well, in a brokerage account that you could borrow against, if you were just going to buy and hold stocks or index funds, well, that's tax deferred anyway. You don't get pre-tax money. You have to pay your tax and then invest the rest. But at least the money that's invested, you don't pay any tax while it's just growing inside the stock market, which is, that's meaningful. So the deferral that's available in a 401k is not as powerful. It's not as powerful when you're using it on equities, which could have been deferred anyway. But things like bonds or high yield savings instruments that's fully taxable, well, that does actually make more sense to keep in a 401k. and have that deferring. So you have to check your own allocation. But if you're already going to be allocated to saving somewhere, maybe that's where you allocate it, knowing that um, hopefully you have a loan option. And if you do, you can borrow half of your account balance up to 50K. If you have a $100,000 account balance, you can borrow that at any time for any reason. You do have to make amortized principal and interest payments, but at least that does go back to yourself inside the 401k plan. There's a little bit of tax inefficiency in that you have to pay the interest with after tax dollars. But again, if you're looking for liquidity, whether it's for emergencies or opportunities, and you have to measure like where the most effective place for money is, a lot of times it is going to be a brokerage account. But even if the 401k is at a higher rate, the fact that you are paying yourself back that interest almost kind of subsidizes that rate. Granted, you are paying it back to a place where it is going to be hard to get it out. But for the sake of getting $50,000, no questions asked liquidity, that may be a big deal. Having that on hand, having that available, that may cause you to be able to buy assets at fire sale prices. If we get some big corrections, big recessions, big depressions, you may be able to get a much bigger bite of the apple on that 50,000 than you could, or then worrying about whether or not you had to pay it back at a prime interest rate, which is 8. It's talking about being lower. But that's what we're looking at right now. Now, also on that note, I just want to say that, you think, well, I don't want to have to pay principal and interest. Well, if you can borrow 50,000, maybe you just carve out 10 and just put it in a high yield savings account, and every month just use that to pay back the 401k loan for the first couple years or whatever that is, as kind of your initial exit strategy until things cash flow for you. Setting up a self-directed 401k. So for those of you that are self-employed or have self-employment income, there is an opportunity there, because a lot of you are asking, hey, how can I defer more, right? And again, we talked about why you may not want to, but a solo 401k, if it is something you wanted to do, if you are a super high income earner in a penal tax state and you do want to defer more, there's a step where you can do 25% of your income up to $66,000. But with the solo 401k, you get the same opportunity to do 25% of your income, which may not equal $66,000, but you can also defer $23,000 on your own, regardless of how much you make. So you get to double duty. So if 25% of your income is 43, and then you defer some of your income, that it doesn't matter if you already put 25% of your income into the solo 401k to equal 43, you get to do up to a $66,000 total defined contribution maximum in 2024. You could defer the other 23, and that gets you to the 66. So this also may be useful if you like this idea of using a 401k as an emergency fund. If you really wanted to accelerate that in year one and you think, oh gosh, it's going to pay the tax anyway, but I want to keep it liquid, and so that'll help me be liquid quicker, you can get to 66,000 the first year. Or if you already have a little bit of a balance or something you can roll over, you can use the 66 to get to 100 very, very quickly using this method. So again, it has to be a self-directed 401k as opposed to an IRA rollover. So you have to have self-employment income. Even if it doesn't equal 66,000, as long as you have some, you can set one of these up. So I used a company called Broad Financial, a guy named Noah there. He was great. He was great to work with. They explain everything. They actually usually have packages. It's about $1,000. I think sometimes they have coupons for a little bit less. You may mention the name Hutch as a coupon. At one point, that got you $200 off. And they actually help set up the documents. And then you're the trustee. That's the nice thing about having a solo 401k is, as the business owner, you are the trustee. You have a fiduciary duty to yourself as the retiree, and also to make sure the government eventually gets their tax or maintains the structure and keeps the rules correct. Whoa, there he is. All right. Fuzzbuster paid off, by the way. Rodenzo Pro M, I think is what it's called. Killer. So notice we've been on for about 15 minutes. And some people have radar detectors and they're like that, they're chirping all the time. Well, that's because they have all the bands available. At least in California, they almost always use KA band. You can look it up online, and when you do, you'll see what they use. So I just have it for KA band and laser. So it's great. I got to hear that guy long before, but it filters it, but it still gave me plenty of advance notice. So that is pretty cool. I digress. Fuzzbusters, retirement plans. Uh, okay, where were we? So once you get that emergency fund set up, you can then just use the solo 401k strategically. So if you have a really big year, um, and like it's keeping you from there's also the 199 cap A deduction. That's the self-employment deduction. Like if you get to a certain level, that starts to phase out and that's tax-free income. So then it absolutely makes sense to go ahead and max into a 401k to bring down your AGI, uh, so that you don't lose that exemption. Because what's so great about that self-employment kind of tax-free 20% you get is usually to get a deduction like with a 401k, you have to defer into something. If you're a business owner, you have to buy equipment, right? And do depreciation or immediate expensing or whatever, but you have to spend money to get a tax deduction. This is just like you get it for that 199 cap a business owner, self-employed or business owner, that 20% of your business income on K1 or 1099, as long as you're under certain thresholds, is tax-free, which is nice. Um, anyway, going back to the 401k, the other nice thing about a solo 401k is you can set up a Roth option there. So even though there's these mega backdoor Roths, I always wonder if they're going to go back and they're going to hit people with it and say, nah, this is a step transaction, because it really is. They have rules against like high earners doing Roths, but then they're allowing this backdoor Roth. That's because they need tax revenue so badly right now. But technically, it is a step transaction. What's nice is you avoid all of that with the solo 401k. That 23,000 that you can defer, that into a pre-tax version or a post-tax version. Again, Broad Financial can help set that up um, for about $1,000. Use coupon code Hutch, and then you can invest in precious metals. You can invest in real estate. I don't recommend it, but you can also do private money lending, not to your own entities, that's self-dealing, but to other people's real estate deals. Like that is possible. That's with a pure self-directed solo 401k. If you're just looking to do stocks, bonds, options, things like that, E-Trade seems to be the best company because they have um, the Roth option available, and it's free to actually set up those accounts through them, which is pretty attractive. Again, if you want to do anything exotic like precious metals or private money lending or real estate, why I don't like real estate inside 401ks is you lose a lot of the benefit, like the depreciation, the ongoing tax benefits of real estate. Yeah, it's all tax deferred, but you lose that if you lose the depreciation if it's in a 401k. Again, if that's all the money you have, so be it. Or if you're just diehard real estate, well, okay, you have to do the math to see if that makes sense. And again, if you're just gonna be in ETF, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, E-Trade seems to be a good way to go. Got no coupon code for you there. When you are the trustee, though, it's great. You just set up a bank account. I'm using Solera National Bank. That's who Broad Financial recommends. You can you control the bank account. You get a post-tax, like the traditional 401k, and the pre-tax, and then you can move that to different places. So if you listen to the precious metals, you can just use that to set up an account in the name of the trust. You as the trustee, boom, you buy the precious metals, you get them vaulted, and you do everything through the bank account, which is pretty nice. Again, making loans. Again, you call Broad Financial. They actually do pretty good servicing. I think it's only a $250 annual renewal fee, and they answer all the questions you need. Anyway, I hope this was helpful about retirement plans. There is, sometimes a need for them. You need to be surgical and tactical with your with your ongoing income, and it can be a valuable tool also with 4D banking.